Good evening. Welcome to tonight's program. I'm Kelly Wright, coming to you from my home in Maryland due to this COVID-19 global pandemic, which of course has the state of Maryland shut down, as are many states throughout this country. Yesterday was Palm Sunday, and the President of the United States says this is a holy week that we all should be reflective and prayerful as we undergo this new normal that is affecting each and every one of us. This is also a week where we will likely see more deaths coming along because of coronavirus. Right now, the coronavirus death toll surpasses 10,000 here in the United States as hospitals face severe shortages. That's according to HHS, Health and Human Services. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers has suspended in-person voting in Tuesday's primary. And if you love golf, well, the Masters tournament is tentatively rescheduled for November now. So as we continue to see all these different things taking place, cancellations and people adjusting to a new lifestyle, over the weekend, I also went out to see how people are grocery shopping or shopping for needs that they have at home. And that now is part of tonight's opening observations.
Doing all right?
Yeah, trying to stay safe.
You know, you guys are on the front line. That's all right. You guys are on the front line. What's it like?
Crazy out here. Crazy.
I appreciate your help, man.
It's crazy out here.
Stay safe.
Yes, sir.
How are you adjusting to this new normal?
Just taking it day by day, trying to understand what's going on and making adjustments from there.
My first guest on the Kelly Wright Show today is Ken Blackwell. He is the former Secretary of State for Ohio. And Mr. Blackwell, you're doing a lot more now. What else are you doing these days? I can't keep up with you. You're involved in so many things. Just bring us up.
Well, you know, Kelly, I was also the treasurer of the state of Ohio. So I've stayed connected to Wall Street and to the whole dynamics of the global economy. But in addition to that, I chair the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, which is funded primarily by USAID, and we help with the administration of elections through election administrations across the globe. So my calendar is full.
It is full indeed, even in the midst of this COVID-19 global pandemic. What do you think about the president's response to this crisis, as well as his task force for dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic?
The president now has dual tracked two interrelated spheres of concern. The first is the health of the American people, and the second is the health of the American economy. And he understands that these two tracks are interlinked. And so unlike folks who are just concerned about the economy or folks who are just concerned about the public health, the president is faced with a whole host of critical decisions that he's had to make. And I think what he's done is struck a real balance. He is optimistic, but he is dealing with the public health concerns that his experts have shared with him. He is talking about safe distancing and staying in place strategies just to flatten the curve of the spread of the virus. On the other hand, he understands that we have to get Americans back to work as soon as possible. And what he's done is he's embraced an economic strategy which does a couple of things. First, it infuses capital back into the system. And so last week, working through the Small Business Administration and the Treasury, there is now a strategy administered by banks and local and community banks, pumping capital back into the system through small businesses and entrepreneurs and their workers. That is very, very important to make sure that we don't go deeper and deeper into an economic hole, but more importantly, to in fact inject some hope to America's workers and families that there is a strategy to help with their economic woes as well as their public health woes.
And Ken, we're also, as you know, in probably the most critical week and the week to follow. And this is the week that it is anticipated that we will see an escalation in the number of deaths as some states like New York reach what some are suspecting will be the apex. And then there's the back end of that where we may see a downturn as well. But the president yesterday said that he saw a glimmer. He didn't want to overspeak, but he was stating that he saw a glimmer of light in this darkness. What does he mean by that, since we're facing probably the most deadly week, as some experts have stated, based on the models?
Well, I think what the president understands is that that number of deaths is a lagging statistic, meaning that what is being reported this week happened last week and the week before. And therefore, what's going to happen is that the American people will see an escalation in the number that's reported. What the president is basically saying is like, look, there is a glimmer of hope, whether it's what we've seen in New York, and that is at least a couple of days of a downtick in the number of deaths. And secondly, there seems to be more and more communities within our states and within our nation that are buying into the 30-day program that really lowers the curve, flattens the curve of the spread of this virus. The president also has gotten over his desk, reasons to hope in terms of vaccines and things that will help to mitigate the impact of this virus. And so what he's trying to do is lead a nation. And you don't lead a nation, just expressing despair. You, in fact, lead a nation by, if we can go biblical, by not hiding your light under a bushel, but raising it on a candlestick, basically saying that hope is reflective not only of the magnificence of our God, but the genius in our American society.
I'm talking to Kenneth Blackwell. Ken Blackwell is the former treasurer and the former Secretary of State of Ohio. He ran for governor, and at one point, many said that he would become the president of the United States, but he is still serving the public in so many ways. He's going to stay with me just for the next break, and we'll come back right after this with more of Ken Blackwell talking about not only the president's response, but what perhaps he personally is enduring, like we all are, with this new normal, which I've often said on this show is quite abnormal. We'll be back with Ken and more after this. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined by Ken Blackwell, who is known throughout the United States. He's not only a politician, but he's a member of our society. He's a member of the African-American community. Many years ago, when he got into politics, he became the treasurer as well as the Secretary of State of Ohio. He has loomed large in the field of politics. But politics aside right now, we all are dealing with a global pandemic that knows no political stripes, knows no color. And yet, Ken, we find that there are reports that the African-American community, because of its health disparities, are facing more travails from this global pandemic. Just last week, Dr. Benjamin Chavis talked to me on this show and stated that the NNPA Black Press USA had declared a state of emergency for Black America, trying to remind all Black Americans to take this coronavirus seriously. What say you about that?
I would just underscore that. You've laid it out perfectly. Our community, for any number of reasons, more people in our community have those underlying conditions that make them vulnerable to this virus. And so we have to have a special effort to make sure that there is compliance and that there is a discipline to how we in fact push back. Look, this is also very important. We live in a high technology age. And I read a book probably back in the early 80s, John Nesbitt. It was called Megatrends. And in that, he had a chapter that said high tech, high touch. And what he was basically saying was that the high tech nature of our rapidly developing culture actually created a situation where we started to become a culture devoid of human touch. Now, I'm not just talking about the physical touch. I'm talking about expressions of kindness and communication. And I would just tell you, this is something that I talked about for the last 30 years. When I grew up in a public housing community, the first part of my childhood, you know, I could get in trouble at one end of the project, and by the time I got home, my mother was already standing in the door with her shoe. And that's because while they had the internet, they have the internet today, we had the AuntieNet. I had an aunt in every window of the project, and they moved information just as fast. And we as a community can't forget that. We have to pick up the phone and make contact, communicate that human voice to people who we in fact care about is so very important. And while we can comply with social distance strategies, that doesn't mean that we cannot use modern technology to express, you know, modern day expressions of human touch.
Well said, my friend. Well said, because I've said on this program numerous times, while we're socially distancing ourselves, let us not isolate ourselves from each other. Pick up the phone, call someone, just get in touch with them through social media, find out what's happening in their lives and encourage them, because certainly in a time like this, we certainly need it. And if someone is testing positive COVID-19 and going through it, pray with them. We can't get to the hospitals, but we can try to reach out to them the best way that we can. Well, having talked about all of that, now you also have another hat that you have. You're still working with the FRC, I understand.
Yes, Family Research Council.
Tell me about your role with that and how the Family Resource Council is reaching out to people in this age of this coronavirus pandemic.
Well, one of the things that we know at the Family Research Council, and I am an advisor to both the C4 and the C3, and most notably, one of my best buddies in life is Tony Perkins, and we are joined by General Jerry Boykin, who is a couple of months younger than I am, so I call him Junior. Look, we are an organization that understands that, you know, our Judeo-Christian values and ethics are the foundation of what makes America an exceptional nature. So we've in fact encouraged people to stand on the word of God as we work through this crisis. And that doesn't mean that you can ignore science or that you can ignore the advice of public leaders who are putting us on a path of fighting back intelligently. But it does mean that we understand that there is a foundation in this country that is biblical, that is spiritual, and that is religious based. Look, that second paragraph in the Declaration of Independence, and my dad used to always tell me and my brother this, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident. He said that was the highfalutin way of saying any knucklehead should be able to get this. That our rights are not grants from government, they're gifts from God. And that we in fact should understand that, and that God will help us get through any crisis if we don't abandon him through fear in a crisis.
And certainly the family is at stake right now, but we have this shutdown time and we're locked in, and it's time to pull together as families in all of our communities, Black, white, brown, yellow, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, all coming together to fight this dreaded disease. And certainly as we talk about faith, Ken, yesterday was Palm Sunday, and the president has reached out to members of the faith community and all faith communities to say, let's use this time, let's use this week between now and Easter Sunday to really pray together and come together as a nation. And while he faces many critics for some of the messaging, this is a time that we should try to come together. And as you stated, not ignore the science, and certainly at the same time, not ignore our sovereignty, or God's sovereignty, I should say,
Right.
in carrying us through this pandemic. Ken, I thank you so much. My best regards to you and your family, and my prayers. And give Tony a hello for me and a shout out. I appreciate you being on the program today. You're always welcome here on the Kelly Wright Show. God bless you. Stay safe.
Thank you, sir.
Kenneth Blackwell on the Kelly Wright Show. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined now by Marvin Cratch. I introduced you to him last week. Marvin is the CEO and president of CVE. That's the Christian Vision Entertainment Network. He's based in the Newark, New Jersey area. And Marvin has been dealing with COVID-19. He contracted it and had pneumonia. So Marvin, we want to get an update now on how you're doing, because we see that you're at home. Tell us how your treatment has been going.
Well, I feel fantastic right now. I feel relieved that to know that I'm doing better. I'm healing. I'm moving forward, and everything seems to be just going back to my normal health. The normal way of life, we don't know yet, but health-wise, I'm feeling fantastic.
Now, you've been given, 14 days to quarantine at home since leaving the hospital last week?
Yes.
As you know, the President of the United States yesterday was talking about the hydrochloroquine, as well as some other drugs, and one in particular was the one that you used. And he was criticized for doing that, but he basically stated that you've got to try something, because he didn't want to wait for the protocol, which would take 1.5 years to 2 years for the testing of other vaccines. Do you have any, I think you've already addressed it, that you're concerned about other people taking it because they might not respond the way you have?
What I would say to people is this: the president is doing the best he can. I'm not saying that to be jumping on a political bandwagon, but we were hit with something that they had no answers to. And to be able to take a medication that worked on one area and tried it with something, and it has some form of success. It's not going to be successful with everyone. And I'm not saying that we're different or whatever, but some people react differently to different medications. But it has worked for me. It has worked for various other people that I know. And just like I talked to a pastor, a friend of mine, who's dealing with it in the hospital right now with pneumonia. I told her, test it. Let them test it with you. And be at the same time, follow every procedure. Don't go thinking this is not a death sentence unless you're not following what you're doing. If you catch it early enough, you can defeat this. Like I always say, Mr. Wright, you are the landlord of your body. You have the right to evict any illness out of you. Serve an eviction notice on anything that's not right. And trust God in all things that you do. And ask him to bless your body. But at the same time, he gives you wisdom to follow what they tell you to do.
Yeah,
so the combination of all of that is why I'm sitting here talking to you today. Because as I sit here, I'm ever thankful now, because there are people that didn't make it out the hospital.
Right. There
are people
who have not made it out, and many of those people have followed your same advice, and unfortunately, they're no longer here to tell the story that you're telling. So you're one of those who are among the recovering, and we should point out that the recovery rate is rising, just as sure as the death rate is rising. But hopefully, Marvin, in the next few days, next few weeks, we will see this death toll decrease and recoveries increase. So I appreciate you sharing some insights into what it's been like for you. Keep us up to date. We're always praying for your good health, and it's good to see you.
Can I share one thing, Mr. Wright? Can
Sure.
I share one thing? We're going to be doing at watchcve.com, we're going to be sharing with people how to survive this crisis, how to get and protect yourself against yourself. Use the right things. I'm going to be doing specials on our network, the helping people on watchcve.com. It's coming up this week very soon on talking about my recovery, talking about how to recover in this time, not just from the illness, but from the mental state that it has placed people in. So I'm going to be doing whatever I can to help people. And anytime your network need me, I'm here to come forth and give a message, because I am blessed to be here today. And the best way to bless others is to share. And that's what I want to do. I want to share whatever I can to help others.
Well, we thank you for that. And we thank you for what you're trying to do now to help others. And we thank you for sharing your insights with us. And we wish you well. We are praying for you. God bless you. Get better and stay safe. Marvin
Thank you so
Cratch.
much, Dr. Wright. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Marvin Cratch on
God bless you and your network.
Thank you. We're back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. There are a lot of things going on in the world as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic, and one place we should not overlook is Israel, particularly in Israel, where there are Holocaust survivors still living. They have survived the Holocaust of World War II, which was a genocide that actually caused the extinction or extermination, if you will, of 6 million Jewish people. So how are they faring? Because they're getting older, and quite naturally, older people are susceptible to this COVID-19 pandemic. But as we're finding, it's also global and it's affecting all ages now. So joining me now is my good friend, Susan Heagy. She is the head of Abundant Hope International, and she is based in Israel, where her entire mission is to reach out compassionately to Holocaust survivors, to tell their stories, remember their stories, and to never forget the atrocities that unfolded for them, those despicable acts of World War II. So Susan, thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We're in a new normal now, and how are you finding Holocaust survivors there in Israel coping with the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, it was very interesting. The first indication that we even had that we were going to be locked down in any way is we went to see survivors that were in a hostel. They either live in their own homes or in a nursing home or in a hostel where it's independent living. And we went there and it was locked and we weren't allowed in. And that was our first indication. Within a few days, we were informed that we could no longer visit them at all. And then we were told we couldn't even bring birthday flowers or anything. We couldn't bring them the gifts that people have sent them. And so immediately I called my translator, who's in another city. He's in Haifa. We're here in Akko. And I told him, okay, you can't go, but you can sure call. And I started him and another translator calling them to see how they were, because our work is encouraging them. That's what we do. We bring compassion and encouragement. And immediately he found out they were definitely impacted by this. Now they were locked down. They were not allowed to leave their homes because they're the most vulnerable to this virus. And the comments that he got were, this is just like the Holocaust. This is just like when I was in the ghetto. This is what it was like when I was there. And we were always in our home because we weren't allowed to leave, waiting for the knock on the door that took us to the camp or to be mass murdered. We were just waiting constantly. And the other one told us that he was in the Leningrad siege, where 900 days Leningrad was locked down and they could not get food. And there was a lot of starvation and a lot of cannibalism. And he said, I know I have food, but I feel like, am I going to get my next meal?
Mm. So this pandemic with the coronavirus is a stark reminder to Holocaust survivors of what they survived and overcame during the genocide of World War II.
Yes, they're scared.
That is astonishing. And so what can you do to alleviate their fears? And what is to your knowledge, the Israeli government doing to protect its senior citizens, particularly those survivors, which they revere?
The Israeli government was excellent, and they were quick, they were fast. As we called the survivors to find out what their needs were, of course, we have certain ones that are alone and have no one with them, and they're the most vulnerable. Others have family, or they have a caretaker. And the government immediately began sending meals to those who are the elderly. But with any program, you have people who have fallen through the cracks. And so we took the numbers and names of those who were not receiving meals, and we contacted the number from the social services, which was the Army. And it's the IDF that are taking the meals to them. And they take them several times a week, and they are delivering them to all of the elderly. I'm limited as well, all of us, so I can't go out. I can't go to the survivors. I can't even stand outside their homes and wave at them.
Wow.
We have to do everything now administratively.
Thanks for watching the Kelly Wright Show. When we return, we will have more of my interview with Susan Heagy, president and founder of Abundant Hope International. That's next. Wow, so it affects your outreach and your charity and your ministry to reach out and help the very people that your organization is designed to help. Anecdotally, for those of us here in America, now I've been to Israel. I visited with Holocaust survivors there in Haifa and Akko, along with you. And I've seen the exemplary work that you do in reaching out to their survivors and keeping their stories alive, just as Yad Vashem does, which is the director for the Holocaust Memorial there in Jerusalem, keeping people up to date and abreast of these stories so that we never repeat this type of dastardly deed of history again. So anecdotally, what would you say to Americans as we are embracing our own new normal, which is abnormal? We're leading the world right now in the sense of COVID cases and even deaths right now, as we expect that to rise. What would you say to us based on what you're experiencing there in Israel?
One is listen to the government, listen to what they have to say. You know, I know that President Trump is very good about doing daily. Here we have the Prime Minister Netanyahu speaks to us about every 5 to 6 days. He comes on, gives us an update, tells us what's going on, and we have good news here. I mean, as far as good news outlets. And so stay informed. The other most important thing to do is pray. I mean, if it wasn't for praying, that's how I start my day. And we pray for the survivors, and we pray for them on the phone if they would like. We give them that choice. And calling them and talking to them and finding out what it is that's needed. Help your neighbor. This is us helping our neighbor, really. But we have to learn new ways to do it. We had a survivor who called up desperate, crying. My washing machine broke. What am I going to do? And I'm thinking, oh my word, in midst of this, yeah, what are we going to do? So I found a repairman who would go. He went and he fixed it. And she started dancing and laughing and crying. And she called back, and this is what she said. My machine was old like me, but I figured it would last the same amount of time as me. And when it quit, I wondered if I was next.
You know,
Giving her
amazing.
a washing machine that's
Yeah.
fixed gave her life.
It's amazing how the simple things in life, we affix ourselves to that and attach ourselves to that. And when something breaks and it can't be fixed, and a lot of people don't understand, older generations and the older people of our society, how
That's right.
attached they are, especially when they're living alone and isolated. Susan, thanks for bringing us up to date and keep us informed about what's happening with all of the people in Israel, but in particular, what's happening with the Holocaust survivors. To date, have you known of any who have contracted COVID-19, and how are they faring?
The very first victim of the COVID-19 in Israel was a Holocaust survivor, 88 years old. And I would say probably a third of the survivors, that it's been survivors who have died from it. The age, the last one that died was 98. I mean, the oldest people in the world are living here. But when a virus hits them like this, and some of them, the grandchildren have come to see them, or children have come to see them, and they can't. They need to let them be isolated and reach out in every other way. Do what you can for them, but follow the rules.
All right. Susan Heagy, Abundant Hope International, great charitable program over there in Israel. We thank you for weighing in on this issue. And as you mentioned earlier, we're praying for you, so keep praying for us as well.
Thank you.
All right. God bless you, Susan.
God bless you
That's
too.
the Kelly Wright Show after this. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined now by Dr. Yolandra Hancock, and she has been keeping us updated on the medical aspects of this COVID-19 pandemic. Last week, Doc, you revealed that you had one of your patients, you are a pediatrician, one of your patients tested positive with COVID-19. How is the child doing?
He's doing very well, quite a bit anxious about having the infection, but from a symptomatic standpoint, he's recovering very, very well. His mom is doing a phenomenal job in loving on him and providing him with all the nutrients he needs to help him recover.
That's good. That's great. That's good to know. Are there any protocols that doctors have to follow to treat patients who are testing positive with COVID-19, and yet they don't have to be administered to the hospital because their conditions are at best like a flu and they can get over it, as opposed to being intubated and put into the hospital?
That's an excellent question. I certainly for myself have a protocol that I use, really focusing on food as medicine. We know that the immune system is critical right now in terms of helping patients recover from COVID-19. So what I make sure to recommend are some of the things I believe we've talked about before, making sure that we get in enough B6, D, C, E, and the element zinc in order for our immune systems to be equipped to fight off the infection. That's what his mother has really focused on. And then paying attention to things like his fever, providing antipyretics, fever medications, really supportive care at this point. Despite what the federal administration says, we're not out prescribing hydrochloroquine willy-nilly right now until the evidence proves that it is effective. We're doing the old-fashioned stuff that we would usually do for any other viral infection.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you say that, because I was just talking to someone who was actually treated with the malaria drug while he was in the hospital. He's an older gentleman in his 60s, and he said it helped him. I know the verdict is not in on this yet, but I guess doctors are resorting to whatever they can, as the president said yesterday, try it, because he doesn't want to waste time for another year to 2 years to go through the testing phase of these particular vaccines that are being developed. What do you say about that?
I think the challenge is that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You don't go from our standard ways of evaluating the efficacy and safety of drugs to just try it, see if it works. We know that hydrochloroquine actually has risk of causing heart arrhythmias. So for patients in a hospital who can be monitored, you can actually try it and see what happens. The problem is that there are several different things that we're trying to see what happens. We're using antivirals. We're using medications that fight off worm infections. We're using high-dose vitamin C. You don't want to throw the kitchen sink at every patient trying to figure out what works. There is a reason why we have these processes in place. And should we wait 12 to 18 months? Not necessarily. There are ways in which we can do trials in the hospital even now, but to just say to try it, I think is irresponsible. Particularly when we saw someone who actually did try it. They saw that there was chloroquine in a fish tank cleaner just about a week and a half ago, and he ended up dead, and his wife ended up in the ICU because they just tried it. So I think we have to be very, very cautious in the messages, particularly for our leadership, that are put out there, because we do not want to put the general population at risk.
It's a very good statement, and that's what so many people are concerned with some of the statements that have been made by the president and other leaders throughout the country. Governors, for example, opening up beaches again, which is not really advisable in this pandemic, since we really don't know why the transmission is. Is it beyond people to people? Is it now airborne?
That's the concern. As we talked about last week, the National Academy of Sciences looked at a variety of studies where there is now concern. That's the reason why the Surgeon General and the CDC are now, 2 months later, telling people that they should wear masks. I never thought I'd see the day where the Surgeon General on national television pushing out videos showing people how to make masks out of fabric. Like, this is the United States in 2020. I never once thought as a public health professional I would see that, but it speaks to a lot of the unknowns that we have around COVID-19. And because we have to make sure that we are operating in as a protective space as we can, for me, I was recommending the use of social distancing and those things a long time ago. The reason why we initially recommended that folks not wear masks is not that they weren't effective, at least for myself, is that people wear the mask below the nose, at the chin, on the tops of their heads, or they're adjusting their masks and actually increasing their risk of transmission. We see that countries like China, who've been wearing masks forever because they've been exposed to so many respiratory viruses, it makes perfect sense. But when leaders give conflicting messages, when our governors are telling folks stay at home, but we're going to open the beach, or religious leaders are opening up church. Like, my biggest fear this weekend for Easter is that people will not pay attention to the stay-at-home orders, that a lot of folks will show up at church. I love Jesus, and Easter's my favorite holiday because of the sacrifice that Jesus made for us to forgive us of our sins. But we have to be prudent and follow what we know is right in public health, and that is to stay at home.
Doc, stay with me. I know you have some concerns about some of the residents who are being called into practice, and some of those medical students who are graduating being called into practice by Governor Cuomo in New York. We'll talk to Dr. Yolandra Hancock about that right after this break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. So I'm talking to Dr. Yolandra Hancock, and she's a pediatrician and has been treating a young patient who has COVID-19. I'm happy to say, and she is happy to inform me, that he is doing well, and his mother's following all of the good doctor's advice. There are a lot of concerns that you have, doctor, about the call to action, or the call to the front lines of this health pandemic in New York City and through other parts of the states. But Governor Cuomo in particular has called upon medical students who are about to graduate, to get their degrees. He's called them to the front lines of this pandemic, and we've seen that some doctors have died on those front lines, nurses and other health practitioners. What are your concerns about the move to call in these young students? What are your concerns about their safety?
My main concern is their inability to advocate for themselves. When you are a medical student or a doctor in training, also known as a resident, these individuals are literally being put in a position where they have to make a choice between their lives and their livelihoods. I think it's important to understand the journey that a medical student, a physician, enters upon to become a doctor. We go through 4 to 5 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 to 7 years of training. And what we just saw over this past week is at least 3 residents, doctors in training, lost their lives on the front lines. They didn't have an opportunity to opt out of standing in the gap to protect or to provide care for patients. And they are taken out in the prime of their career. They haven't even had an ability to practice yet. They're still dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars of loan debt, not really given an option as to whether or not they're going to serve. I got asked through DC and Maryland, I was asked as being part of the emergency medical reserve, can I come out and volunteer? But residents and medical students don't have that same option. It's either you show up or you get kicked out of the program. And there are programs now that are threatening residents that if you do not show up, you will be removed. And they're also not providing them with the personal protective equipment that they need. If already on the front lines, the attendings that are showing up to treat patients don't have the equipment that they need, but you end up putting in more people to take care of patients, people who just got out of medical school, who just finished their training or in the middle of their training, they have not yet been able to learn some of the things that excuse me, are necessary to treat these patients. They're not as equipped as an attending. And we know that some attendings are actually pushing these residents out. I remember being a resident where I had been worked all night. You can tell I get emotional talking about it.
Yeah.
I'd been worked all night, and instead of my attending showing up to assist, I was expected to follow through. They're working 80 hours a week at minimum, and making less than minimum wage when you calculate out their hourly rate, not being offered hazard pay. Old programs are actually putting out letters to tell residents, we will not offer you hazard pay. So no additional pay for their service. And I love nurses. They're unionized and they can protect themselves through their union. They're being offered $10,000 to $15,000 a week to take care of COVID-19 patients. And we're telling young people straight out of medical school, in the middle of their training, we're not going to protect you with positive personal protective equipment. We're not going to pay you any extra. We're not going to provide you with hazard pay. And guess what? You don't have an option. You either do the work we tell you to do, or you get booted out of the program.
Dr. Yolandra Hancock, that really states it quite well. And it's a concern that heretofore many of us were not aware of, what residents go through and what they face. And I appreciate you bringing it to light. And we will continue to follow up on this story to see if we can protect those residents so that they have a future and a hope.
Exactly.
Really important.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate you as well. And you're always welcome to come on and bring us all the updates. And we appreciate you so much in educating us and informing us about these young residents and what they're facing, as well as keeping us informed of how our nutrition can boost our immune system. And again, Dr. Yolandra Hancock on the Kelly Wright Show. We're coming back with more after this. Welcome back. And now for my final word. And the final word tonight is encouragement. As we go through this week to be reflective and prayerful of a holy week, we must also understand that it's time to encourage one another. Don't give up doing that. For those who are serving on the front lines of this COVID-19 pandemic, keep them in prayer and keep encouraging them. And for each and every one of you who are going through your own anxiety and stress, stay encouraged. Keep lifting each other up. Don't despair, have hope. Don't fear, have faith. Don't be bitter, get better. And as I always say, I hope that you've been ignited, and united to keep spreading not fear, but love, freedom, and peace. As we leave you, here's a selection now from jazz and classical violinist Diane Monroe. Peace out, everybody.